Okay, I truly believe that Israeli settlements are not the sole barrier hindering peace in the Middle East, although it has contributed to some degree to question the occupation of Israel, which is completely legal under international law. I'm going to give some historical context to defend why I don't truly believe that the settlements are the true barrier to peace. From 1949 to 1967, which is almost 2 decades, the West Bank and much of Jerusalem was controlled by Jordan. And during these nearly 2 decades, um, there were no Israeli settlements, and there were numerous Palestinian terrorist attacks against the nation state of the Jewish people, Israel. Palestinian Arabs committed terrorist attacks when there were no settlements, and committed terrorist attacks against Israel when there were settlements. So with these facts and and this information I just gave you establishes my premise as to why I believe that the Israeli settlements that we currently are seeing today are not what's completely hindering the barrier to peace. And I'm going to pass the mic.
Thanks, Sebastian. Before I continue your points, I'm going to go ahead and lay out my case. And first of all, it's not that I believe that this is specifically the reason that peace is not being achieved in this situation. It's one of four reasons. So that's why I wanted the title change to a barrier, because if I had to say what the greatest barriers are, there are two things, and there's really only one that, well, they both play into settlements, but there's one that more than the other, and one is refugees, and two is East Jerusalem, which leads into my first counterpoint. So my first counterpoint is East Jerusalem, and it's the fact that, as I pointed out in our last few debates, John Kerry left office saying that he believes that it's one state because East Jerusalem is completely surrounded by settlements that go into the West Bank that block the city off into the Israeli territory. So, and I'll post up the map of that. So the first point is that East Jerusalem is blocked in, and and then there's sub points to this. Point B, which also goes back to East Jerusalem, is that it was annexed. So they've claimed that as their territory, and they've been condemned by it, as we talked about through the UN. And the third subpoint C, is that the Palestinians want it as their capital, but in all these peace deals, it's actually in Raqqa, so it's actually in a suburb of East Jerusalem. It's not in East Jerusalem itself. That's surrounded by settlements. My second contention point is, and it goes, this is in direct contradiction to your statement, is that it is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and I would like to talk about that some more in this debate as well. Third contention point is that, as I've illustrated to you before, and I'll show you the Knesset document again, through law, it is a Jewish state, and that it is a Jewish state by ethnic majority. It's not a theocracy. And point four is the way that these settlements are constructed, and which goes back to point three, and that not only in that they're ethnically, they're for one ethnicity, they're also built very high. I was actually hoping to show a piece of my artwork that illustrates this, but not worry about that now. But they're actually above. I mean, I'll just post some pictures of it, and so people can see. They're actually built above the Palestinians in a way that where they have to look up at them, and they know that, so they know who's dominant and who's in power. And I'm just about out of time, so I'll go ahead and pass it back to you.
I'm going to contend your first point. You talked about how there's that's one of the reasons why you don't quite grasp that it's a barrier to peace because of the refugees. Well, the refugees that have been settled into Israel, they have been integrated into Israeli society. Now the refugees that are in the Palestinian border, those refugees are in the Palestinian camps. The question should be, why have the Palestinians kept them in refugee camps while Israelis have taken in refugees and fully integrated them into society? for most of which we even have them in parliamentary leadership today, a lot of the descendants. I'm gonna just try to to attack that point, since that point was the first, and I just want to respond from you as I pass the mic.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and answer your question. There's two questions here. The first one is that these are Palestinians who live outside of both Israel and the Palestinian territories. They don't live between the river and the sea at all. They live in other countries like Syria and Jordan. When you go back to why haven't they kept them, the Arab population that's allowed to live inside Israel are just the ones who did not flee in the 48 war. So they didn't flee at that time, and for whatever reason, they weren't expelled from their homes and they were allowed to stay. And they are integrated in, but as I've told you before, they're only about a fifth of the population altogether. And as far as why don't these other Arab countries accept them, the thing is they do, and there's a burden on them. They, like I said, a lot of them live in Jordan, Syria, they live in Lebanon. So they're not even inside. No, they're not inside of the proper borders of Israel or even the Palestinian territory. They live in these other states. So go ahead and pass it back. If I can find the button.
So you mentioned that they're not in between the river of Israel and Palestine, those Palestinian refugees. You said they live in Syria. And then in another comment, you said that they won't allow them into Syria because there are other Arabs living in Syria. I mean, can you clarify that point again?
I've never said they wouldn't allow them in Syria. They are in Syria, and they've been at war with Syria since 1967, and they're fighting right now.
So you said Palestinian refugees that the UN acknowledges and continue to condemns Israel are living in Syria. Is that right? The Palestinian refugees are living in Syria.
Yes, there are refugees who live in Syria.
Are Palestinian refugees living in Syria? That's the fundamental question. Are they living in Syria, or are they living in Palestine? Which one is it?
Both. They live in Syria and they live in Palestine, and they also live in the proper Israel, the border of the proper borders of Israel. They live here in the United States. I've met Palestinians live here in the United States. They live all over the place, but most of them are refugees in Arab countries. Some of them, yeah. I mean, I don't have a direct number but there really is no comparison. They live in, most of the people we're talking about here, they live outside. As far as a barrier, this is what the barrier is that I'm just going to say, let's just say it's half, and I know it's at least half, that they don't live inside these borders at all. They live outside in another Arab country, and through the Geneva Convention, they're guaranteed one of two things. And of course, this is because of the Holocaust that this document exists. They're either guaranteed a right to return so they can go home and live there again, or B, they need to be compensated for their private property that they lost. So it is a question of private property that was lost, and the right is guaranteed. And as I told you before, through the Geneva Convention, it's non-binding. So when you say that it's legal, no, it's completely illegal under international law. And the UN has, of course, said this over and over again. Not that they'll ever do anything about it. Not that they're going to do anything about it. But they're violating the law, and they don't live inside Israel. They live outside of Israel, and so I hope that answers your question. And they live everywhere, both.
Okay, now there are Palestinian refugees who have descendants who are now in parliamentary leadership in Israel. Can you provide any documentation or any leaders that you know of, like Palestinian refugee descendants who are in leadership position in Arab majority countries?
Well, I mean, we only have 4 minutes, so I can't say this in a nice long way. You're making a plea to ignorance. You're only talking about one area. So when you say that they're included, and I've already agreed with you that they are, but it's only 20% of the population, and it's only the ones that live within these proper borders. And under the Geneva Convention, it is an entire territory, because even if those people aren't officially citizens, if they're under an occupation, Israel is responsible for them and their rights under the Fourth Geneva Convention. So it is a violation of law. So it's I don't know, and I don't think it's a valid comparison. I mean, as I said earlier, I admire. I guess I kind of got to say hi to a Palestinian lawmaker who's pretty popular and who I admire. So I know they do have strong leaders over there.
Okay, now to your second point, you said East Jerusalem has settlements and blocked in, and they have been annexed by Israel. You can't consider it to be annexed by Israel if it was once occupied by Jordan, and it was through military. It was through a military aggression by Jordan that Israel took it from them. Annexation is an invasion. Let me give you an example. Hitler annexed the Czech Republic. Why is it called annexation? Because he invaded them. The Czech Republic leadership never attacked Germany. It was just Hitler took the initiative to invade the Czech Republic and annex it. So that's the proper context of annexation. So because Jordan was the aggressor and this territory was theirs, and they lost it to Israel, it cannot be considered annexation. Under international law, if a neighboring state attacks you, you have every right to occupy their territory. And I'm gonna pass the mic. Give you a chance to respond to that.
Oh, okay. So the war that was fought was in 1967. The annexation happened in 1980. So there's no the act of force just happened to be 13 years later. So basically, they used the force and they took it. And as far as who attacked who, it's impossible for both sides to even agree on an historical narrative of events. So since we're kind of limited on time, I'll illustrate it this way. And I'll go back to one of your other points was terrorism. Since Israel was founded, I'll just say the two shocking things. They've actually been condemned for terrorism twice. And the first time was in East Jerusalem. The UN peacekeeper who was sent there, I can't remember all the formal titles. He sent there in 1948. He was murdered by the Israelis. It was condemned as terrorism. And then they had the Levant affair where they attacked the British later in the 50s and blamed it on Egypt. They got caught red-handed. The U.S. cut off their aid. So the terrorism's on both sides. And when you say they have a right to occupy, that's they have a right to their security. So it's not really a question of security when you annex something. And you say they have a natural right, but the thing is, the Jewish population that lived there, they only were a quarter of the city, because there's actually three parties. There's Christians too, but they were at a quarter of the city, and they were on the west side of the city, not the east side. That was the Muslim side, and that's the side that's blocked in by these settlements, where the Palestinians want to put their capital, where they can't put their capital in reality because their capital is in Raqqa and the West Bank. It's not, which is real close to East Jerusalem. Just kind of like, well, I live real close to Columbus, but I don't really live in Columbus. They live in Raqqa, so they're in Raqqa. They live in, they live outside of East Jerusalem, and they can't go, and they're blocked from East Jerusalem too. And that's what Kerry was so concerned about when he said it was one state. He said, how can I negotiate this now, because it's blocked in through these settlements. So it really, so that, going back to my point, so it really is a barrier, not the barrier to peace, and it is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention that guarantees those rights, like a right to return and a right to private property and a right to security, and so forth and so on. So I hope that answers that question. I have 30 seconds left, so I'll just go ahead and hit it home. And yeah, so I think that my points are much clearer, that there's a real problem with East Jerusalem and the settlements being built around it. I wish we had some time to talk about the way that they're built above. And of course, I can't fail to mention that the people who live in these settlements don't live under military law. They live under this more of a democratic law. So there's a huge difference there. So let's just follow the Fourth Geneva Convention, okay?
All right. I'm just gonna address one more point that you made about the annexation would require the governance of this territory by Israel. So Israel would have to implement, like have to have a consistent constitution, like how it has in Israel, where it governs, because that territory is governed, like Israel has no control over the people of that territory's lives. They only have control over borders, like meaning if they're trying to leave, to go into Israel, then they have control over their lives because of border security. But with regards to like where they're currently living in right now, Israel has no control over it. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority has control over these particular territories. But it's just occupied by Israel. And I'm completely against the settlements, but I don't. But as I addressed earlier, I don't believe it's the the fundamental reason why there's no barrier to peace. Now I know you've talked about how it's not the sole reason. You gave 4 contention points, so I'm gonna go now to the 3rd contention point. You talked about one of the 3rd reasons is because the Palestinians wanted East Jerusalem as a capital, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason why I believe that this reason is a flawed reason is due to the fact in 2000, and this is way beyond 1967. This is less than 20 years ago. In 2000, Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Ehud Barak, met at Camp David with Palestinian Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat to conclude a new 2-state plan. Barak offered Arafat a Palestinian state, all of Gaza, 94% of the West Bank, and East Jerusalem as its capital. You talked about that. This is the reason why you believe that there's no barrier to peace. But you had Ehud Barak, who offered Yasser Arafat East Jerusalem as its capital since the year 2000, and Yasser Arafat rejected the offer. And Bill Clinton, who was witness of this Camp David Accord agreement, talked about how Arafat criticized Arafat for being at Camp David Accord for 14 days and saying no to every offer that was made by Ehud Barak at Camp David Accords. You talked about 4th point is because it's the violation of the 4th convention. With regards to that, like that being a reason, I don't contend the settlements as being legal, and the 4th Geneva Convention does address how like settlements are illegal, and I want to focus on that point because of the fact that Israeli settlements are barrier to peace is the topic of this discussion, and I never contended that point. I never made a contention that the Israeli settlements are legal. I'm completely against the settlements because, as I talked about earlier, it legitimizes.
You're out of time. Hopefully, we can talk about.
Oh no, I still have time. But look, let me finish though. I have like 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Yes, so I never contended that the settlements are completely legal. I'm completely against the settlements because I believe that it gives Israel's enemies reason to question the occupation, which is completely legal under international law, which is by the UN international law. International laws say occupations are legal unless any meaningful peace is achieved and all terrorism against the occupying country ceases. Since no long-lasting peace has been achieved and terrorism against Israel has not ceased, military occupations are completely legal in that territory. And so I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna give another point just to strengthen my case. Hold on, just give me a second. I'm gonna give another point. The reason that there has been no peace agreement between Israel and Palestinian Arabs remains due to the unwillingness of Palestinian Arab leaders, and according to Palestinian polls, a poll conducted by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy of June 2014, much of the Palestinian population refused to recognize Israel's right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people. The numbers are 71% of the Palestinian population pressed for a single Palestinian state encompassing all Israel and its territories. So 71% of the Palestinian population don't agree with a 2-state solution, while 29% are satisfied with the 2-state solution. And so that is one of the barriers that are hindering peace. Also, in 2008, Ehud, which is less than 9 years ago, Ehud Barak offered Mahmoud Abbas a Palestinian state, all of Gaza, 94% of the West Bank, and East Jerusalem as its capital, and additional land. Mahmoud Abbas turned that deal down. So I have proved that each time Israel has agreed to a Palestinian state, Palestine have rejected the offer, which is contributing to the fact that there has been no peace. So the conflict is not to pressure Israel to make another offer to Palestinians. Perhaps it's time to pressure Palestinians to finally acceptance of a Jewish state. And potentially then we can potentially have peace in the Middle East.